As we move from a scale of architecture to urban design to urban planning, these become even more important. That how do we create spaces, create infrastructure which revolves around building better community experience.
But today, because of this dichotomy of either being design oriented or being ecology oriented, we are actually finishing off one very big skill of the architect, which is to organize and to design or to create.
So the way we have really looked at our profession and the city, sorry to say this, but we are never bothered about water management.
In every architectural forum, urban design forum, non-civil engineering forum, every forum that you name, we're talking of sustainability these days. But if you see actual sustainability approaches that are happening in private practices, or in our schools, or in our education centers, it's only a lip service.
I would like to welcome you all for the first panel discussion of the day, that is Sculpting the Urban Fabric, a macro architecture symposium. And on this note, I would like to welcome and introduce our honorable speakers for the discussion. Um, I would like to welcome Dr. Mansi Bhargava, National President, WICCI, Water Resources Council. So Mansi ma'am is an entrepreneur, researcher, educator, speaker, mentor, and a keen political observer. Her engagement is in the built environment that includes architecture design, development, planning, management, and governance of large-scale developments. With belief in sustainability and livability, she is in practice for nearly 3 decades, a journey in which she has developed her interests in water worries and wisdom besides governance. And she's the founder and director of W4W Foundation and research entrepreneur at Environmental Design Consultants Ahmedabad. And she holds the national president position at the Water Resources Council for the Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce Industry, leading a network of professional women leaders from the water sector from across the country. I humbly welcome you, ma'am, again for the day two of IIDA Summit, and thank you for being here.
Thank you,
And
Kamlaja.
next, I would like to welcome architect Suneet Mohindu sir, founder and principal at Oracles. Suneet sir, he's a graduate from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and a former Charles Wallace Fellow at De Montfort University, UK. He's a practicing architect and a landscape design expert, and he founded Oracles in 1997 and heads this multidisciplinary architectural practice focusing on landscape planning, design, and conservation. He also co-headed Plural Design Consultants for 18 years since 2005 and offering architecture and interior design consultancy. With an intense theoretical rigor and a passionate heart for education, Sunitsa dedicates a sizable part of his time as a visiting professor at the Department of Architecture and the Department of Urban Design, SPA, New Delhi. With a master's degree in landscape architecture and applied research in heritage conservation, his key competence lies in master plans, open space structure planning, architectural design, landscape urbanism, site planning and landscape design, context assessment, landscape history, and theory. He's a keen author and has made several literary contributions in the form of writings, speeches, lectures, presentations, and research papers. So I welcome you again and looking forward to this second session of yours in the summit. Thank you
Thank
for being
you.
here.
Thank you.
And we have architect Habib Khan sir, who has graced us today. Habib Khan sir is a graduate from he's a graduated from architecture from VNIT and went to USA, where he completed his master's in architectural design from University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So after his master's degree, he worked in Philadelphia, coordinating major retail design projects for retail giants across the world. and he returned to India in 1990 and started his own private practice. And he was awarded JIIA Best Interior Design Award by the IIA in 1998 and IIA KAAFF Young Architects Award in 2000. And he was also awarded the Orange City Achievement Award in 2009 and State Level Excellence in Architecture and Education Award by the IIA Maharashtra chapter in 2011. So Habib sir believes that architecture shall be responsive to traditions, climate, context, and be environmentally and ecologically responsible. His architecture is organic, traditional, contextual, and contemporary. Habib sir is also involved in teaching since the beginning of his career, and he has been taking guest lectures and engaging design studios in architectural colleges all over the country, apart from juries and examinations, and his design teaching revolves around sensitizing students towards their own heritage and roots, context, climate within the framework of being contemporary. And Habib sir has been actively working with the government of Maharashtra on a few policy framing. And recently, he just had his term ended as the former president of Council of Architecture. So thank you so much, Habib sir, for being here today with us, even though you're traveling. And I really appreciate you. I had seen you in I'd seen one of your lectures in our summit, international architectural summit. So it's really wonderful to have you in one of our platforms here today. Thank you for being
Thank you.
here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yes. So sorry, just a second. So sorry, I think there was some glitch. Yes, yes. I'm visible, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, great. Next, I would like to welcome our moderator for today's session, Ram Khandelwal sir. So he is the chief director and founder of Urban Innovation Lab, that is UIL. So Ram Khandelwal sir is a seasoned urban professional with over a decade of experience spanning consultancy, research, and teaching. His driving passion to enhance urban living led him to establish Urban Innovation Lab, a hub that synergizes groundbreaking ideas for urban development. So, Ramsar's academic journey is equally remarkable, boasting degrees in management, infrastructure planning, and architecture from prestigious institutions. And his accomplishments resonate globally as he consistently strives for urban betterment. With an expansive career history and dedication to transformative urban progress, Ram Khandelwal sir stands as a catalyst for innovative and sustainable urban development. And he quotes, design and architecture wield the profound ability to mold both spaces and human experiences. They are the conduits through which narratives of places are told, intertwining people with their surroundings. Each line, each material, and space holds the power to inspire and uplift, crafting emotions, culture, and lasting impressions. So, on this wonderful note and on this wonderful quote by Ram sir, I would like to hand over this discussion of the panel that we are here today, Sculpting the Urban Fabric, a macro architecture symposium. I would like to, have your address further, and basically, the intention of ours with this panel was to have learned people, experienced and seasoned people actually from architects and designers who had worked on various large scale projects, urban scale projects, and even community centric projects to come together and share their own ideas and their own experiences and their own journey. So we have, based on the brief and based on Ramsar's wonderful, like the discussions that we had. So we have tried to come up with this, the entire brief through which we are going to discuss today. So Ramsar, really looking forward to your address now.
Thank you, Kamlaja, and thank you, Siddharth, for this wonderful opportunity. And I welcome fellow panelists Suneet, Mansi, and Habib for the discussion. Uh, so today's discussion, when I started discussion with Kamlaja and Siddharth, I think one of the ideas with which we started for this year is how do we kind of bring architecture in building communities, and obviously architecture revolves around building communities, building spaces. So physical form is one thing, but the entire experience around that building is geared towards people. And as we move from a scale of architecture to urban design to urban planning, these become even more important, that how do we create spaces, create infrastructure which revolves around building better community experience. So with that thought process, the way we have structured today's discussion for our panel, we'll have a first round of introduction or individual remarks from each of the panelists, and then we will come together and we will brainstorm on a couple of questions which are going to be around communities and urban development and urban spaces. uh, in terms of giving the flow to this, I think there are 3 to 4 key themes which we are going to cover in the panel discussion today. One of the crucial component of our discussion will start with that, which is around green infrastructure, urban landscaping. So we'll start with that, and we will try and explore the role of green infrastructure in our cities, how we are looking at it, what can we do to make cities more greener and more sustainable, more environment friendly. From there, we will move to the second part of our discussion, which is going to be around blue infrastructure, which is around how do we integrate water bodies, how do we integrate different types of elements of water, how do we manage water within the city. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll try and look at a consolidation, that how community level planning or area level planning can be done, and then this unit of planning, how do we apply this at a city scale. So that's largely the format that we have for the discussion today. And with that, I'll first invite Suneet to kickstart the discussion on green infrastructure. And just to give you a few pointers, Suneet, in terms of what we would want you to share with our audience, is from your point of view, because you have been working in urban landscaping for a long, long period of time. You have had seen a lot of international examples, worked on multiple projects, etc. So, from that context, first of all, how do you see what is the importance of building nature-based solution into cities, integrating it with architecture, urban design, and city planning? So, what is the role which it plays, and why it is crucial and important to look at this kind of infrastructure? And if you could also tell us about a couple of examples from your own work where you have actually integrated green infrastructure or nature-based solutions to make spaces more sustainable, more community friendly. If you could share some of those examples and some of the best practices which you have seen across the world, and tell us a futuristic outlook that as our cities are growing, we have nearly uh, uh, 40% of the population will be in cities by 2030. This pressure on infrastructure which is going to come in. So initially we used to build a lot of gray infrastructure to deal with this, but now we are talking about building green and blue infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure, and bringing more and more focus on adapting to nature-based solutions. So, from that point of view, if you could share some of your thoughts, Sunit, we would love to hear the same. Over to you, Sunit. Sunit, I think you are on mute.
Thank you, Ram. So, one word that you used a lot while saying what you had to was integrating. And I would begin to say one thing here, that landscape has a virtue as an integrator in a lot of senses. So when we look at the term landscape urbanism, so traditionally speaking, if we looked at planning as one of the fields, one of the disciplines of uh, organizing cities, then planning had a small limitation that one would often get very two-dimensional about it, and the entire mm, the entire task of putting across layouts was more mathematical than experiential. And the mathematical models, when projected on larger modular schemes, became more and more large organisms as two-dimensional entities. When we looked at urban design in isolation, likewise, so there was a over emphasis on form making, on the three-dimensional presence of a city, and therefore, traditionally speaking, urban design took hold as a discipline where the shape of the city would be augmented by the form of the city. So that was an important aspect of urban design. And landscape, when seen in isolation, had this pitfall of being solely concerned with the urban greens, and it was like a retrofitting of the existing systems with addition of green, and therefore overtly concerned with planting. And all the three disciplines would be, when seen in silos, would not help a city to become a holistic place to live in. uh, Now, when we look at these three together and see what kind of a role can each play in developing a framework or a structure for a development, then today we are in a phase where we recognize the role of landscape or open space structure as something which can be a decisive shape giver to a city. And not only does when we look at the Mekhagian model, for instance, where you analyze the entire region as a watershed and look at all the available land that you can see and assign value to, and then separate out pieces which you feel are ecologically significant or have other historical meanings attached to those, or any other significance, and then what is left as areas which are more and more anonymous are left for building. And this in itself created a structure, and that became one of the ways of planning a city. But that also had its own limitation of we come to brownfield developments now. That becomes a glue which has the virtue of stitching together things that are apparently not meant for each other. So, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that in terms of shape giving, in terms of creating the framework for urban development, today landscape has become an instrumental tool to be able to provide an open space structure, to be able to provide a structure that can organize the city and dovetail with all the other gray, green, blue, as we call them separately. But I'm trying to bring about a holistic way of thinking about all these together. So that's one aspect that I really wanted to touch upon. And the second thing that I would like to say here is that when we look at landscape in the urban realm, one thing is very clear that the early beginnings of landscape, when we look at history, so it was never known as landscape architecture till the 20th century, and before that it was in the domain of gardens, and then went on to larger complexes and estates, etc. But when it came to when the first public park was designed in Birkenhead, Liverpool, so that was the time when landscape truly became a public realm, and it could not have stopped there. And the public parks soon started to take the shape of park systems, and the park systems gradually, combined to become shape givers to cities, and then, of course, open space networks and all that. But but in all this, the emphasis was on reintroduction of nature into a place which was inherently occupied by it earlier, but then denuded of it by urbanization. So it was like a retrofitting. The profession of landscape architecture actually began almost like a retrofitting tool, where after the Industrial Revolution, it was felt that the city was unhygienic. It was physically and for mental health, it was not something which was conducive for living. And therefore, one would bring about the change by reintroducing nature to the city. And when we talk about reintroduction of nature into the city, then what form would that nature take? So, what were the precedents available? There was a question of style. There was a question of what nature, I mean, what format this nature would come into. So, there is, of course, an aspect of stylizing nature in a city, and therefore we take the names of various components such as parks, such as streetscapes. We get into green belts, we get into the so many names. I mean, there are so many things, lakefronts and so on, so on and so forth. So we get into so many such a gamut of nomenclature, where we again try to separate various public realms in terms of what is landscape. But the key thing remains that introducing nature in a stylized form in a city is something that becomes a statement, where there is a force to reckon with, which has been kind of forgotten. And then that force is now forcing us to rethink as to how to reshape the city. And it is coming in a big way and moving and cutting across in a format where it becomes a jigsaw puzzle of green, built, blue, and gray, and all that. The third point I would like to make here is that when we look at the identity of an urban district, when we look at how one place is significantly different from the other, that is again where the density of landscape has a role to play. That is again where the relative presence of uh, the built and the unbuilt makes a makes an impact on the revelation and experience of traversing through the quarter of that city. So with these kind of things, what is emerging currently is that there are two dichotomies. One is a force which talks about ecological relevance and sustainability, which are big words and big, disciplines in itself, which have become verticals that hold unto themselves. Whereas what I am putting across is that things like sustainability and things like respect to nature and ecology are they these either or these rather ought to be attitudes. These rather ought to be principles in design, no matter what we do. But today, because of this dichotomy of either being design oriented or being ecology oriented, we are actually finishing off one very big skill of the architect, which is to organize and to design or to create. And often we are ending up with very hollow narratives of ecologically driven development, where the sense of putting things together or the architecture of landscape architecture tends to get missing. And on the other hand, there is landscape architecture, so to say, which thrives on miscarried and misconceived image creation or borrowed imagery internationally, which tends to again get uprooted from its context and transported to can you hear me now? Yeah. So what I was coming to was that we. So when we say ecological or artistic, or when we say functional or experiential, this term "or" is a killer. It has to be replaced with an "and." So it's a time of inclusivity, and this is where we must all pool our strengths together to bring in that "and" instead of "or," and really strengthen these spatial disciplines to be able to pull apart and rebuild their relevance in today's urban context. Yeah, that's all that I had to begin with.
Thank you, Sumit. And I think a very important message which you have highlighted here. It's uh, not about design versus nature, but it's about design with nature. So, not looking at design. You have rightly said, design or function versus ecology. So we don't have to look at that ways. It has to be, and it has to be functional, and it has to be environmentally sensitive. So that
And experientially relevant, experientially delightful.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's quite important. And if we start looking at even the initial theories in urban planning and city development, we'll see that a lot of concepts, right from garden city to broad acres, all of it revolved around nature being a part of it. So cities were never conceptualized in these theories as devoid of nature. But I think over a period of time, there has been so many versions of how do we plan cities and how do we execute it using various instruments. So a lot of times there has been a lot of organic growth in which we tend to lose the grip of building along with nature. And I think you have very rightly pointed out that as designers, as planners, as architects, it's our duty and it's our commitment to our profession that we bring these two things together whenever we are planning, and not just at a building scale, but whether we are working at a building scale or at a design scale or a community scale, it has to cut across at every scale so that these elements are truly integrated within the ecosystem and we build more sustainable habitats. So thank you, Sunit, for those insightful ideas and initial remarks. Now I would like to invite Mansi. So, Mansi, like I started the discussion. So, Suneet have started the discussion with how do we look at green spaces, and he also highlighted this uh, very uh, in a very subtle manner that green and blue are actually not different because they are part of nature. So, green and blue actually go together. So, I would love to explore a dimension from your side because you have been doing a lot of work in the area of water and water management and water rights. So, from your point of view, when we are looking at cities today, so what are the key challenges with respect to water which our cities are facing? Uh, why and how we are managing water today? What are its implications? And as a professional, what is your advice to the community of practitioners in terms of when they look at integrating water or blue infrastructure within the cities? What are the key important aspects they should look at? Over to you, Mansi.
Yeah. Thank you, Ram. Thank you so much for this question because you already touched the nerves of the issue when you talk about green and blue. And thanks, Sunit, for giving the warm discussion to link green and blue because the more we divide these things, we are actually creating more issues to our urban fabric. And the title of the panel itself has an answer to much of the discussion which we are having here when we talk about sculpting the urban fabric. And if we go past not too far in our history, we do realize that water was beginning, even in the modern times, was beginning of any settlement. Even if you talk about small cities or small villages, and I don't mean to go all the way to Indus, but it is also applicable to them. But to the current times, if you look at the way water bodies were sculpted out of the land, so it was like taking water bodies out, grabbing the land to create water bodies, to create settlements. In due course of time, now we have grabbed the water bodies to create land, to create more development, you know. So we have reversed the whole process within 100 years of time, where we have lost more than half of the water spread area in the country, more than half, and the remaining half has reduced by half the size, which means within 100 years we are left with only quarter, one fourth of the water spread area of the country. You know, so that includes rivers, wetlands, lakes, ponds, all kinds of water bodies, mangroves. So, given that situation, when we look at our urban fabric and when we talk about water management, let me be very blunt to start with, and I feel really a bit of embarrassed to have be seated with Suneet sir and Habib sir, because I've never been on panel with both of them, and I know these guys work so well. But I will be my natural best, and I will go the way I go. So please bear with my words from here on. So the way we have really looked at our profession and the city, sorry to say this, but we are never bothered about water management. It is not taught in the profession, either planning, architecture, landscape. Even landscape people find that water is not part of their work. I had a recent experience in Kerala about it. So if it is not taught, the whole water itself is not taught, and I'm fighting a battle, including with Council of Architecture, with IIA, that please let us teach water and please allow me to teach water. So when water is not taught, it is not even a concern of 90% of the architects, planners, and designers of the country, because it is not taught, including interior designers. When we are designing houses, we don't care where is the water coming from. When we are designing townships, we are not concerned about the water, where is it is coming from, where the wastewater will go. We are not concerned because we are not taking responsibility, because we are not taught about it. Because we are just designing the land. So we are land designers, we are building designers or planners, we are land planners, and we consider water to be not our subject because someone else is going to provide, and someone else is also going to take away the water from the campus or the building and do whatever it can do. And the classic example starts from the very house design to housing design, the way lavishly the entire profession of architecture has really grown in last 50 years. It is an architecture of the elites, where water need not be concerned about, where wastewater need not be concerned about. When we look at from that scale of architecture of house to housing, and if we look at the upscaling of it, of course, most of the architects, planners, and designers do not have control on sculpting the city in terms of water bodies. We really did not have to do anything outstanding apart from just respecting the water bodies. But unfortunately, we have not done that. And that's the reason I gave the initial statistics to tell you that we have lost more than quarter of the water bodies in terms of water spread areas, because water bodies were left aside as if that land or piece of land filled with water does not belong to the city, and it had a reason for it, and the reason was governance reason or administration reason, because for long time until 2004 or 7, the water bodies were a national asset, or the ownership remained with the national body or government of India, and local authority had no control over designing, planning, or doing anything over it. So what happened, and you can actually pull out drawings from 20 years ago and see that the water board, wherever the water bodies were there was empty white on the map, as if the water body did not exist. And we did the land planning, land design, and architects still do land planning, land design without considering about the water. So given that situation, what have we done in the city? Our cities are the most unsustainable design, because first of all, we do not have control in planning and designing the cities. The development comes before the planning and design of the cities, where architects do not have much control. Planners can still do some bit of planning on it. And then in that process, we have created very unsustainable model of water management. And classic example is all our metro cities, all our big cities. All three of us are from big cities like Nagpur. Sir is from Nagpur, Sunit sir is Delhi, and me, Ahmedabad. We are not having our own. I mean, Nagpur still has its own water, but Ahmedabad, Delhi does not have its own water. Ahmedabad gets its water from 1200 kilometers apart from its groundwater, which is way too deep. Same applies to Delhi. It gets its water from nearly 120 or 180 kilometers, 200 plus kilometers to be precise. In that situation, I see a clear case of mismanagement of water, because we are creating extravagant cities. So in Ahmedabad, in Delhi, in Mumbai, in Pune, in all these cities, we have more water than we need, because we are grabbing the water from the rural areas. And for that, what are we doing with that water? We are actually creating more extravagant architecture, extravagant design, extravagant parks, even lakefront developments, and even riverfront development for that matter. Nagpur is coming up with a riverfront development. Pune is coming up with it. Ahmedabad is already having it and suffering from it. But still, we want to go on and do with the water which is borrowed from somewhere else, and that somewhere else is a rural area. So somewhere we are obsessed with urbanization, and in the process of urbanization, we have severely created an discriminatory society between urban and rural, because we talked about inclusivity, we talked about integrated water resource integration. And let me give you a very simple example of integrated water resource management, which we do not practice in the country, and the definition comes from United Nations. And it says integrated water resource management is a process that promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources. Means if you have mountains, if you have other natural resources, in order to maximize economic and social welfare in an equitable manner without compromising the sustainability of the vital ecosystems. I do recall when Sunit was talking about this whole rift with the dichotomy, he was talking about ecology and sustainability. I may differ a bit on that, because sustainability and ecology was also not taught in water in architecture, planning, and design for long time. It is just a decade old pedagogy which has been included. So if we were not taught, I do not expect, or I do not see we practicing that unless and until we are specialized in it. And that's, I mean, basically then becomes a nominal number of people who have either landscape background or who have ecology inclination. They are practicing it like that. But if in given that situation, if we talk about these cities to be smart and sustainable, and we are pouring in money to make it water sustainable, I am sorry to say this, but we are not making it water sustainable because our water sustainable approach, if it is coming through building more, we are already losing the water sustainability idea. So we are still in a phase where we want to develop more and more and more without the fraternity realizing that the 40% of the water is consumed by the building industry, 40% of the wastewater is produced by the building industry. So even every building is not concerned about reducing its waste and wastewater. Forget about building it. So even after building also we are not concerned. And I think it goes back to the way the pedagogy is designed in architecture planning and design. There is no water in 5, and I was speaking about it in my speech yesterday. In 5 years of course, in 50 subjects, there is no water subject. The way we teach water is the way riverfront development of Ahmedabad has developed. Lakefront development across the country is getting developed, and that is how we teach water, where water is treated as a piece of land, where water is a entity of beauty. Sorry, water is not entity of beauty. So water is the lifeline, and we have forgotten that because water management is not part of the architectural and planning education. If we are going by that, I see we are really far from talking about water management in the fraternity. For that, at least every school has to start 1 or 2 credits, or at least 10 credits course for that matter. And it has to be a vertical course across so that we can produce professionals who can think, walk, talk about water. So we are far from water management from the profession. We are relying on civil engineers, IITNs, IIMs to talk about different means of or different facets of water, tenets of water, where IITNs will talk about making more dams, making more canals, and bringing more distribution, and civil engineers are going to make it, build it for us, and we will be just focusing on our making beautiful parks, making beautiful waterfronts, and making unsustainable buildings. That includes making 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 bedroom houses, and making big buildings which has really very unsustainable practices of water use. So I think somewhere we have misunderstood water, and we have taken it for granted in the profession, both in building house design, housing design, and city design. It was never part of our game. And I think it is high time that we talk about making it part of our game, but it can only come once we start teaching. And I give a very simple example of it with the concern of lake, which is my area of work in terms of study and activism. We are often obsessed with lakefront development, where we see lake as a park. Sorry, a lake is not a park. A lake is a lake. A park is a park. It's not a lake. But there is a difference when you create a lake in the park. Your intention is to increase the water resilience. Your intention is to harvest water. Your intention is to make the park more water resilient or sustainable. But when you make park in the lake, your intention is absolutely development and economy oriented, where you intend to really make a park to make money with user pay fee, where people will enter and do boating and all kinds of water sports. So these are very tricky things when you talk about places for people or people for places. So unfortunately, our city design process is also discriminatory, not only in terms of urban rural but also in terms of species. We are only human centric. We imagine cities not to be inhabited by other species. We have eaten up all the water bodies, only 25% is left. So if we go in this manner, we are way far from talking about sustainability, and the statistics is right in front of all of us. India is the worst hit water crisis country in the world, and I mean even our Niti Aayog Composite Water Index talks about more than 21 cities going ground zero by 2030. So, and it all has been actually contributed by our profession. I don't see any other profession really responsible for the mess we have created with water management, and it starts from the education. Over to you, Ram. Thank you.
Thank you, Mansi. I think that was a very captivating narrative which you have shared with us, and uh, I'd just like to reiterate. I think one of the very fundamental issue which you have raised is how do we look at our education when we talk about water sensitive cities. And if we are talking about building water sensitive cities or water sensitive communities, then education is the basic building block which needs to be tackled. And I think that's a very valid and very important premise which we all should consider when we are talking about building water resilient cities. I think another point which you have pertinently highlighted, Mansi, is regarding are we building places for people or people for places? And that actually dictates the same principle which you highlighted, that bringing park in a lake or lake in a park, it actually kind of resonates how we are thinking about building spaces. So we need to rethink that how do we bring water management. I think in last decade there has been some traction at a national level where we have started talking about building programs.
Yes.
In fact, the latest Amrut 2.0, which the government of India is implementing right now, we already have a provision of 20% reuse of wastewater at city scale.
Yes.
I think it's now a matter of how do we operationalize this and not just look at water as a means, but it needs to be looked at as a resource. Almost 80% of the water that we use in cities, if we are able to make reuse of it, a lot of it is available. We look at countries in Middle East, let us say Jordan. These cities and states are reaching 80% water use. Singapore, for example, they are at 100% reuse.
100%.
So these places have shown that it's not possible, but it has to be a priority. And we need to start thinking that as policymakers, as professionals, how do we give more priority to bringing water management in our design, whether it's at a building scale, at a campus scale, or at a community scale? How do we make sure that we are conserving more water? How do we make sure that we are reusing more water so that our water footprint goes down? So thank you so much, Mansi. And I'll now like to invite Habib for another piece of discussion, which is essentially about now we have talked about two aspects, which is looking at a philosophy towards green infrastructure and a blue infrastructure. Now, how do we bring it all together? And Habib, you have been the president with Council of Architecture, led an organization, have been to multiple colleges, taught these subjects, being a part of academia and practitioner. So, from that point of view, what do you think architects, planners, and fellow professionals in the field, when they are talking about building urban spaces, what should be their priorities? And priorities both in terms of greenfield as well as brownfield, because our problems are on both sides. Uh, we are looking at redevelopment or redensification within the cities. At the same time, we are also looking at peri-urban development. So, in both the context, when we talk about building an urban fabric which is sustainable, so what is your approach to it? What are your ideas and suggestions? And if you could share some examples with us that how fellow professionals can make it happen in a more sustainable manner. Over to you, Habib.
Yeah, hi Ram. I had a network connection initially, but I got halfway. I could only hear last sentences.
Do you want me to repeat, Habib?
I'm neither a very quickly if you can in couple of sentences.
Sure, sure. So I was actually trying to take this discussion in a direction wherein we could explore that when it comes to our profession, architects and planners, how do you see them addressing issues in brownfield areas, which is basically redevelopment and redensification, and how do we tackle issues related to sustainability in built up areas which are within the city? And when it comes to peri-urban areas, the areas outside city which are organically growing or being developed in a planned manner, how do we make sure that these developments are sustainable? So what are some of your ideas, and how can we bring this green and blue infrastructure uh, and integrate it with the development which can happen in brownfield and greenfield development in this? So if you can shed some light on that.
See, first of all, I'm neither a landscape architect or an urban designer, neither an activist or a hardcore academician. So I, first of all, thank you all for inviting me and considering me worthy to be a part of this discussion. I will give you a bird's eye view of what I think and what should be done and what is being done. Of late, I've been involved in a couple of policy making decisions and policy making authorities. And very recently, we've started work which is in the urban design realm. So I'll give you a overall view of what I think and what is happening and what is the root cause of a problem and how it could be addressed. I will address Mansi's issues as well, very briefly at the end. Uh, See, when you look at our urban fabric or when you look at the urban development that is happening in our cities, whether they're brownfield, greenfield, peri-urban, semi-urban, rural, there's a there's a overall, there's some kind of a very neglected kind of a approach from our government authorities, from planners, from developers, private developers, or government as per se as a developer. And there's a vast difference in the way we approach and the outcome that we see in our cities, in the urban fabric, as compared to what we see in the Western world or so-called developed world. In fact, even in the Far Eastern cities or Far Eastern countries, there's a big difference. And we're having a discussion during a conference in Glasgow a few years ago. And very interesting point was taken up by a professor there, one of the presenters, when we were having an interaction in a panel discussion. He said that the South Asian countries, especially the Indian peninsula, is having a genetic issue. It may not be negative or may not be positive. He was comparing the culture that is Indian subcontinent with the culture that is Western, and how fundamentally the minds work, how fundamental the genetics work, how fundamental the cultural connotations work in development of a city. And I found it very interesting. He said, look at your music, for example. And he gives so many examples of that. But he said, look at your music. It is individual oriented. A classical singer singing vocal, a tabla, sitar, sarod. It's an individual oriented performance. While if you see the Western music, it's a symphony of hundreds of violins playing together, a piano playing the same note together. So that I'm giving it in very short. I'm giving an example in a very short thing, and that makes a difference in the way you approach urban design in your country, or way we approach urban design in our country. So I mean, if you put that in reality and you see this factual situation, you find that our houses are very nicely made, our communities are very nicely made, gated communities are very nicely made. We maintain our houses, but we throw our trash just right outside the compound walls. We are least bothered as to what happens outside our walls, outside the compound walls. Same, you start from a micro level and you go to a macro level, you'll find the attitude is same. I'm not saying it's negative. I'm saying if we do not have the basic genetic approach to have a community-based planning system, a design, community-based design methodology, which will impel us to, propel us to work collectively in a community-based inputs or community-based systems. And that is the fundamental difference that we all are facing when it comes to urban design. Organization of education, when it happened after the Boas and Gropius, systematized architectural education, the quality of architectural education has deteriorated. Regulation of architectural education has actually killed architectural education. And that is the fundamental. I mean, when I talk of architectural education, I talk of urban design, planning, landscape, anything that you could name of. Architectural education, I'm talking like a big umbrella which covers all these aspects together. So organization of education has actually killed it. If you understand the essence of architecture, learning, or the process of making an architect, it has to be an extremely holistic processes. When we have the moment when we actually started working in silos, in compartments of urban design, urban planning, landscape, MEP, mechanical engineering, planning systems. When we started working with water bodies, green, blue, gray, white, kind of approaches, it has actually killed a holistic development of a designer who was a encompassing person. It was fine in medicine, when you have specialists. The concept, see, what has happened in medical education is that the family physician, a general practitioner, is dead. You have a ear pain, you go to a particular specialist. You have a heart a problem, you go to a cardiologist, and so on and on. That actually system which has percolated into architectural education has actually killed the development of a holistic professional, and that is one of the fundamental problems that I am discussing. What happens to our urban fabric? What happens to our urban to our cities? What happens to our rural development? That is number one. Number two, that's number two. Organization of education was second point. The first was our genetic composition and our approach to community contribution in planning and development of our cities. Number three, if we look at the concepts of sustainability, concepts of being sensitive or green, going green, and so many other terminologies that you are, including blue, green aspects that you're talking of, we are all doing lip service. We are actually not contributing. We are only talking about them. We're only talking about them. And the problem is that we have started, at least, I'm not saying, what I'm saying is the problem that is happening these days, that it's very fashionable to talk about these things. We absolutely, in every forum, in every architectural forum, urban design forum, non-civil engineering forum, every forum that you name, we're talking of sustainability these days. But if you see actual sustainability approaches that are happening in private practices, or in our schools, or in our education centers, it's only a lip service. The council would probably introduce sustainability as a subject, but what after that? So the application, there's a gap between the cup and the lip, and that is where the problem is. That is where the problem is. We are not able to bridge that small little gap. And the positive aspect is that council recently introduced climate change as a syllabus in the schools. Yesterday only it was approved, and it will be. So that covers, Mansi, all the water aspects and all those augmentation and other things. That is covered in the syllabus. But that will happen sometime. But see, at least we have started talking about it. My positive approach is we have started talking about it. Let us have some heart about this. The lip service will actually get converted into reality very soon. We have just started about talking about sustainability, environment friendly, not only in architecture, but our urban fabric as well. The way we are developing our systems, the way we're developing our landscapes, the way we're developing urban planning, including urban planning. So we have started talking about it, and it takes some time. It will take a decade or two for it to be implemented. We may be going wrong probably in making riverfront developments or lakefront developments, and killing the rejuvenation of water bodies, or bringing in the way we are bringing in the greener aspects that you're talking of into our urban fabric. We may be going wrong, but that's perfectly all right. We will learn from our mistakes, and gradually, see, this is urban development is not a process of a decade. It takes a couple of decades for it to develop into a concrete policy and to learn from our mistakes that we're doing. You're talking of semi-urban, peri-urban, rural areas. Fundamental problem with our cities these days, and the urban development that is happening in our country, is migration from rural areas. The loading of infrastructure facility in the cities that is happening is killing our cities and the quality of life of our fellow citizens. How do you address this? And I'm very happy to share that We did this in Maharashtra to a very great extent, uh, successfully, sensitizing uh, our MLAs and the politicians about rural development. See, we need to empower. I mean, understand one thing: the quality of life that is happening in our urban fabric these days is deteriorating by the day. Not only in terms of pollution, not only in terms of uh, lack of resources and infrastructure, the loading that is happening on our infrastructure because of rural migration that is happening into urban centers is killing the life of urban dwellers, is spoiling the quality of life of urban dwellers. And to a great extent, by the time a city wakes up and gears up, realizes that, I mean, the quality of infrastructure has to improve, it is constantly burdened with additional migration that is happening from the rural center. So, very few have realized this. The percentage of understanding that the problem has to be solved at the root, not at the end. You know, so if we start giving facilities like metros and transportation systems and improving the quality of water that is coming in, giving electricity and other things, and maybe, however much we work on our urban fabric and quality of urban development, it will not be resolved. The problems will perpetually keep happening. And our cities, when we stop giving examples like we want to make Bombay into a Shanghai, or Delhi into a Tokyo, this problem is not going to. The mental approach has to change. The problems have to be addressed in the root cause. And I'm very happy to tell you that when I was the president of the council, we initiated a initiative with the Parliament uh, office, Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha. Every MP is given a grant to develop village, to adopt a village and develop a village. And we are developing a training module. We've developed a holistic rural development policy in which we are not only teaching and sensitizing the politicians about the quality of work that happens in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas. So, how do you develop a village holistically so that rural migration stops? Migration from rural areas stops to urban areas. Quality of life improves in the rural villages itself. So, economical developments, sustainable development, social development, sports, everything that you can think of can be developed, and that policy has been approved. And we'll be now start training MPs and MLAs across the country on this aspect, so that it's a small effort, no doubt, but this small effort will go a long way in the long run, because if we are successful in controlling urban migration from the rural areas to urban areas, then half of the problem will be resolved then, and the quality of urban fabric will definitely improve. And I'm sure that I don't know about the new education policy which Mansi was talking of, the pedagogy and learning at the architectural schools, whether the new education, the national education policy will change that or not. But unless we think of taking architectural education out of the silos that we all are working in, I'll be very happy to design a landscape project, a large scale landscape project, and I'll be very happy if Sunit designs, an hardcore architectural project. And we are all experts of everything. We are holistic experts. Then the sensitivity to these silos that we are working in will go away. And that is the correct approach to education. And that is the only way to improve the urban fabric and ultimately result in a better quality of life for our fellow citizens. So that's my starting input, and then we'll discuss as and when we go along.
Thank you, Habib. I think very important points you have highlighted, and in fact, there's a good debate I see coming up based on some of the points which you made. Uh, so I think let me just highlight the key points first in terms of what we discussed, which is basically it's when we are talking about communities and cities, community centric planning in India is missing, which is more of a cultural issue which you highlighted. And if we look at a Western context, the concept of local area planning or concept of community-based planning and participatory planning is much more robust in a Western context compared to India. Do Though we have the legislations in place, we have the municipal ward committees, or maybe in rural panchayat there are ward sabhas, etc. But again, how operational and efficient they are in terms of driving these agenda and having that capacity to drive development in cities or in communities is something which still remains a question. And we need to look at how this model of participatory planning can be more strengthened in an Indian context. Secondly, I think you highlighted a very important point which was related to placemaking as an integrated aspect. So rather than looking at developing infrastructure, let us say something for mobility, something for landscape, something for water, or something else for something else, which is more of a sectoral approach, we need to start looking at an integrated approach where we are started talking about placemaking. And I think that is one of the fundamental challenges which has been there in Indian planning system for a long time. Though master planning or zonal planning have always talked about an integrated planning approach, but when it comes to implementation, there are multiple departments who are doing sectoral developments. So there will be a department which will be developing roads, and it may or may not align with the overall integrated plan. At the same time, power department will start putting power infrastructure based on their own project reports rather than reconciling it with the mobility plans or with the road infrastructure which has to be developed. So each and every department within the government is actually working in silos and building this infrastructure in silos, and that's where a lot of integration related issues comes in. And the third thing, which is related to building better quality of life in rural areas so that migration can be reduced and the pressure on cities can be lessened. I think that's one of the points which you have raised. Though, as an independent professional, I personally feel that it's a difficult thing to do because, see, migration is something which is not just driven by quality of life; it's also driven by economic opportunities, and the per
I'll
capita
interfere. I'll intervene. Ram, I'll intervene here. I want to add what you're saying. It's not difficult. We have to make a beginning. See, the thing is, no one wants to leave your roots. No one would want to migrate from a village to a city and live in a slum or in facilities which are lacking, which doesn't even have the basic quality of life that the person has in the village. Economics is the only thing which drives him and earning money. If you are able to augment agriculture, if you're able to augment other things, where basic fundamental survival as far as economics are concerned is taken care of in the villages, I am sure no one would want to migrate. But this will happen now. You see, in Maharashtra or most of the country, most part of the country, there is no electricity in the rural villages for 6 hours a day. 6 hours a day. You get electricity in the morning from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock offices start, in cities, so the power supply is cut. We get a shortage of power supply, and then a village does not have from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the morning. There is no electricity, and then again it comes for the pumps to work for the agricultural fields. So this exploitation of the powerful, and from the powerful by the powerful of the weak. This means the urban centers. Power means urban centers, weak means rural centers. Unless this exploitation stops, things will not work. And this exploitation has to stop from the Urban Development Ministry, where we have a very sustainable model of city development. Where a city stops after a certain time, it doesn't develop, it develops into a new nodal center and becomes a new city, a satellite city, where independent facilities are being given and taken care of. And this will not only improve the quality of life of a nodal city and the satellite city as well. And you have heard, you're all urban designers, Patrick Giddes and Garden City, and so many models were there which we have totally forgotten, and we've absolutely forgotten. And if we are able to do this, Stop the exploitation. See, you are a citizen of this country, and so is the citizen, a person who's living in great tier 3 city or a rural village. He's also a citizen. He has equal rights as you. He has equal rights over natural resources. Why should he be paying for your comfort and your benefits? Is number one. So we need to look at this point holistically. And after some time, I will talk of a concept of a common good. After you finish.
Sure, Habib. I think let me just uh, uh, take forward this discussion, and then we move to the next leg of the discussion. So I think on the economic opportunity side, one of the things I personally would like to put on the table is we typically start talking about urban versus rural, but urban versus rural is not a linear concept. It's basically there are multiple transitions which are happening between urban versus rural. So the way we define rural in India, so there's no definition of rural in India. There's only definition of urban in India, and it's a standard census definition that we follow. uh, what we are talking about, the moment this infrastructure and quality of life we start putting in a rural areas, we are talking about smaller settlements which have urban characteristics. So it's not strictly about urban versus rural, but it's more about uh, letting the growth transpire to smaller urban centers, which is currently being concentrated into mega cities. So
No,
rather
I think we
than
should leave the. I think we should leave the rural areas untouched. They are better than our urban areas. I think we should leave them untouched. Honestly, just empower
I
them with basic
endorse it.
facilities
I
and amenities.
endorse it.
Yes,
I
I mean
endorse
we
Habib
have
sir on this. Huh?
we have screwed up our urban cities. Let's not do that to our rural areas. Let them be as they are.
In fact, Habib sir, we should stop glorifying urban centers and vilify them so that more people are interested to return to rural areas. Like people like me and you, probably given an opportunity, we would like to return there.
I'm sorry, Ram, I'm
no,
interrupting
no,
you,
perfectly fine.
but
Anyways, see, urban areas have their classical issues. The amount of investment that we do in urban in India vis-a-vis what we do in rural, there's a great disparity, and it has been a disparity for generations. And infrastructure issues are a result of this long-run disparity that we have in the country. But let me start taking this discussion forward in terms of building more spaces. So we started talking about placemaking as one of the approaches. I think Suneet, Mansi, Habib, all three of you talked about an integrated approach to developing communities, building communities. So when it comes to brownfield development, I would just like to request you to share your point of view in terms of how do you see placemaking can be done more effectively in brownfield areas in cities? What is your take on this? So maybe to start with you, Sunit. Sunit, you're on mute.
Sorry. So I would first go back to what Mansi was saying earlier about the lake and the park, and talk about that a bit in terms of placemaking, because that is where we go wrong. So when so many examples today in terms of our smart cities and in terms of government initiatives to get lakes developed, and then in the name of development of the lake, it is actually what is being developed is the garland around the lake, which may be a part of the road or a promenade or a park or whatever it may be, in complete isolation or neglecting completely the idea of the watershed of the lake. So there is no idea of where what is the position of that lake in the system of water, and it is absolutely being looked upon as quote unquote placemaking. And then we also put a sign, I love so and so, with a heart, and put the city name, and glorify the municipal development who's responsible for retaining somebody to do that. Now, when I look at water in landscape, for example, see, water is not only a lifeline or a resource, it is also a force that molds or creates landscape. So most of the, apart from wind, most of the landscape in nature are created and evolved using water. So the landscape is constantly being modified because of the movement of water. And this recognition is something that is getting alienated from our sensibility of design. So on one hand, we are saying placemaking by using the reflective quality of water and the value of drawing visitors to it because of the opportunities it may provide to sit around it and boat in it. That's one way of placemaking. But I think placemaking should start or needs to actually begin with protecting the place itself to make sure that the place exists before you beautify it. So in this whole idea of placemaking, if we are getting down into actually killing what that resource was, and in the next 15 years we would not have that lake any longer, then we'll think about deploying tankers to fill in water. So that's the irony of placemaking exercises in the country now. The point that I'm trying to make is that much of our work is also reactionary. For instance, when you talked about brownfield developments, now I am a person who is, let's say I'm retained by somebody to develop an IT campus, which is brownfield. It has exchanged hands between two promoters. It was in a mess, something has been done, and then you want to infuse a fresh life into it. And let's say that's one example of it. Or there's another example where a greenfield housing condominiums are coming up in a place like Gurgaon, where the plots are demarcated based on the Khasra lines, and these have no relation whatsoever to the flow of water. The water lines and the land division lines are completely in oblivions of each other. There is no know-how about how this happens. In fact, as a child, I used to wonder, when I was a small child in school, I would see the map of India and I would see those serrated lines that are around all the states and the boundaries, and I used to think to myself, how did this shape come about? And then I saw the map of USA and I saw the straight lines and in so I somewhere I thought to myself, probably we are more conscious of the topography of the lands, and that is why our boundaries are going like that. Little did I know that that was not truly the case. And even if that was the case in distribution of boundaries of states, when it comes to the plotting in a city or in a newly developed urban area, it is again based on a grid which is completely blind to how the natural forces, the flow of water, the topographical features, and the overlying vegetation is. It really pains to see something like that in places like Gurgaon, where you have very, very straight cuts completely blocking the path of water, and then we talk about flooding. So it's totally ironical. So in some of our projects, we use this as a reactionary artistic tool. So, for example, I remember one housing where we had these three towers, and we gave it a concept saying that these towers are brutal assaults on land, which have come up like that from the land. And therefore what we did was, whatever pattern was there on the ground, we artistically brought that pattern on the terrace of the tower, as if the tower had lifted up the ground and taken it on the sky. And the intervening area around the towers, we just laid a very, very forceful pattern of water flows. It was a curvaceous pattern in which had a lot of force and artistic force in it, through which then the roads and the pathways and the greens and the drop-offs and everything else was organized. So not always do you have an opportunity to set things right in the way of being a person who would have the power to set things right or build anew. But sometimes you also use your power of reaction as an artistic entity to give your peace of mind on how you would like to design given the reality of what is happening around you in the world. So that's one way in which I would like to answer this question. And when it comes to placemaking, really, at a lot of time, another reactionary way in which I tend to act is I look at uh, the context that is missing, that has gone, that has completely gotten depleted, or I associate with something which is rooted to our thinking but has vanished completely. And I try to get that as a motive, as a way of organizing space, as a way of bringing back some sort of rooted thinking by celebrating what was historical and putting the pointers towards how sustainability was a nerve center of all that historical way of development. It wasn't something that had to be introduced and retrofitted into a system. It was very much inherent in the way we thought about things. So I think placemaking in that sense does depend on a lot of factors that are there which stand up for the place as it is and as it was, rather than trying to beautify it. So my larger point is that placemaking should not be looked at as an exercise in bringing about uh, an alien character or misplaced beautification, or simply making things noteworthy and attracting people to them. Of course, this has its own benefit too. For example, with regards to a lot of water features and water bodies, cities had turned their backs towards them, and they became garbage dumping grounds. And when it becomes a piece of attraction, then some things of that sort stop. But that still does not take away from the point that a lake is a lake because it draws water from somewhere, and the runoff of that water is dependent on what happens upstream and not downstream. So until that issue is addressed, that what is the resource and why is it worth celebrating, placemaking will not have any place in our world of thinking, I think. Over to you.
Thank you, Sunil. Mansi, your take on this?
Thanks, Ram, and I think Sunit sir made it a little bit easier for me to talk about placemaking in the context of. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. In the context of waterscapes. So the way we have looked at waterscape is only the front of water. So we have lake view apartment, we have lake view hotel or township, and riverfront, river dales or something like this. So, of course, waterscapes or water bodies have been looked as a commodity to appropriate in the maximized possible way. Whether we are drinking from it directly or not, but at least we would like to take the optional value out of it and empower the land around it, to use it. And the very example becomes like when we start creating parks around the lake. I recall Hussain Sagar Lake from Hyderabad, where the very idea of garlanding of the lake started in the country. So the first thing local authorities could think of in every city plan now is to make a road around the lake, and the intention is not really bad. I mean, the intention is to ensure that this is the lake area, you know. So then looking at the lake in isolation and talking about placemaking for it, and this is where we end up doing parks out of lakes, and as rightly mentioned by Sunit, without giving undue due respect to its watershed. So if we look at traditionally how placemaking happened in these water bodies, especially all the rivers and the lakes, and you take any city, any village in the country, lakes and ponds and rivers themselves were placed around which settlements were there. Every village, and if I give example from Ahmedabad itself, where my study also has done quite a bit of papers, every village had 2 or 3 ponds. Now these were shallow water bodies. We dug them further. We reclaimed land out of those ponds and we created lakes. So basically, we made deeper water bodies. We created land around the. So every time a lake development happens, 1/3 or 1/4 of the land is created. I mean, reclaimed, or I will say encroached. In a theoretical way, we use the word grabbing. We call it water grabbing. So the water body volume may remain same, and that's the logic which every designer and local authorities use, and they create a garden around it to make a place out of it. We have gone completely wrong here because we are unable to appreciate a wilderness around the water body. We want a clean landscape with one, monoculture plantation. We want the plants which we like to see. Which we want the trees. And to my surprise, in Gujarat and mostly in Ahmedabad and places where we work, like Rajkot, Surat, and Baroda, if I leave Baroda a little bit, then to my surprise, every client, everybody wants trees which do not have their leaves falling on the ground. So these, they want a big leaf. So champa becomes a natural choice for beautification because it's all year round flowering. So our idea of place making around the water bodies is more like beautification, even if the water body is dying. And that is the case, by the way, in Ahmedabad, because all the lakes and the river is fed by Narmada water illegally by the local authority. So I'm not embarrassed to share this information from the ground because on paper, you will not find anywhere mentioned that the water in the lakes and in the river is from the Narmada because that is not allowed as per the transboundary contract between the two states. So if we are creating this kind of places where water bodies are merely seen as places of recreation, then very notion of placemaking is failed. Because in the past, these lakes and ponds were villages, places, and if you look at the urban fabric of that time very closely, you see that between the village, which is the habitation area, and between and the lake or the pond, there was this public realm where the temples, where the maidan, where the ground, where the market area used to be sitting just as a space which was like enough public for the villagers to interact with other villagers or outsiders. Now, if we could have just respected that when we were developing our cities, we could have really had these pockets of mini centers all around the all around the city. And now I would like you to imagine also these as mini pockets of economic centers. Why only pockets of, ecological centers or green centers? I can even imagine, go beyond and imagine that because all these lakes were connected, and that was my thesis way back in 98, 97, when I looked at these lakes were connected by drains, and I would like to imagine those drains, which are unfortunately they really look like drains, but they are the water streams connecting the lakes, imagining them as green corridors in the city. So imagining a city or a fabric where we have where we can actually literally imagine sculpting the city of water bodies, where we have many of these dots as lakes, and these are sculpted with and knitted very closely. And I can use the word knitted because then these strings of streams could have been knitted with the green strings. We could have not only sufficed our need for public open spaces, which is required, we could have also sufficed our need for green spaces. For example, Ahmedabad has barely zero point 0.3 square feet per person designated public open space. The national guideline talks about 8 square feet per person minimum open space. But because we are not calculating these lakes also as public open spaces, and we only calculate them as public open spaces once they are converted as parks. So what I'm trying to convey here is placemaking was there forever. we have unfortunately colonized the idea of placemaking and thinking that only where designed landscape or urban scape is going to be there, that is a placemaking. Streetscape is going to be there, that's our placemaking. No, I think we have to reinterpret or re-understand the very notion of placemaking. Our bazaars were there before our designers came into picture in this country. Our temple complexes were there, temple spaces. Every temple or every lake had their own cultural and religious places, and these were all the different ways in which villagers used to design their spaces, not literally sitting on the drawing board, but that was the placemaking. Ironically, in the planning process, we have lost the placemaking sense, you know, because somewhere for a long time, architects and planners were also not working in an integrated manner. And apart from leaving the water body aside, so we were creating public spaces or realm outside the public realm which was existing in that area. So we wanted to create independent parks, independent playgrounds, and in the process we forgot which was existing. By if there are 100 villages within Ahmedabad city, we are already talking about 200 lakes within the city. We could have integrated them, because place making cannot be discussed without talking about integration or inclusion. But unfortunately, our place making is now about creating malls, now about creating some streets like CG Road in Ahmedabad or Sindhu Bhavan Road in Ahmedabad. So I think it is our limitation, the way we look at placemaking. But water bodies and waterscapes were always part of placemaking from the traditional past. So water body was not only seen as a water resource for farming and domestic purposes, because people were interacting with the water body also. There used to be small ghats in every pond, not as big as riverfront as we have done in Ahmedabad, where you cannot now walk to the river, by the way, because it is very risky, because the water body is deep. But in the past, people could just walk into the water body, whether it is Sabarmati River or even every small pond. So we have taken away the aspect of association when we created the place making in the new definition, and we want to keep people away from the place, and then we want to create a place making. So you go there, you fancy the place, you look at the place, but you don't. Of course, looking is also interaction, but then in the past people used to there was a community sense also, because people used to be dependent on it, using it for domestic purposes, for irrigation. But now these lakes are just dead cesspools. So we killed the whole place making idea. So we have to redesign our understanding, or our education of placemaking. Over to you, Ram.
I would just like to add one point there from the same perspective where I was also talking about sustainability. So you see, place making in the past historically, I would replace that word by celebrating. So earlier, all our natural resources were celebrated, and that
Absolutely.
those became places. For instance, let's talk about even not the one way is to talk about the way that Indian landscape looks at open space. For instance, in our Western sensibility, everything has a very singular idea that a street is where cars go, and a park is where children play, and a square is where a statue sits, and a town center happens. But in the Indian sensibility, these were all multiple places. These all had multiple uses in different times of the day, and children would play in the streets, and medans and parks would be there. There were no parks, in fact. Now,
Absolutely.
what I'm trying to say is that even the associations, for example, because the river nurtured life, it had the connotation of being a goddess. So it was a mother. The rivers were all mothers, and the way you would respect a mother, it was the same way that you would respect the river by and further further build on it sometimes as an act of reverence by having some ghats and a temple at a point which is a outward bulge in the river and not a inward bulge from where water comes in. So on ridges next to rivers, you would mostly find this kind of development, and on the valleys, you would find forests. Likewise, when you looked at the fact that the rivers used to swell in periods of monsoon, So one knew that there was a fury of the mother, and therefore land would be left till a certain point, because we knew that this is where we could only come back and do some agriculture when it was a lean period, and then go away from here and sit at a safer place. So there was no CRZ, but there was a regard for the tradition and the reverence for our association with a natural feature, and that protected it inherently. Likewise, the mountains, which were the abode of gods. So that is why we knew that this is where we need to be reverent about it, and we would not go indiscriminately killing our hills, because we knew that a rock will fall and it will fall on my head. So I know that there are earthquakes, there are tectonic movements, and the hill shakes, and it's the fury of the Lord, and I need to be away from that and all that, you know. So those stories, those metaphors had meaning in terms of conservation. And even if you look at later ways of the way Mughals built, for example, if you look at the Shalimar and Nishat, particularly the Nishat Bagh in Kashmir. So the Dal Lake is there. Now, what is Nishat Bagh? It is a garden around a water channel, along a water channel. But what is it doing? It is celebrating the fact that the water from the hill flows down along a valley line to fill up the lake called the Dal Lake. So let me celebrate it, and let me be able to walk along it and create a piece of reverential landscape, which I call paradise, and therefore enjoy it. But it always allowed the water to be there as part of the watershed and never obstructed with the natural system of the lake. So all acts of placemaking, even a Bauli for that matter, all acts of placemaking were reverential and celebrative. This is what our culture was all about. Now, in terms of the neo placemaking syndrome that we see in society, it is about taking away the inherent value and replacing it with an internationally accepted, uprooted idea transported back to where it means nothing. And what is also happening in this sense is, now because these places are so unsustainable, that is why sustainability has become a discipline. Now it's so unfortunate, in a school of architecture, you talk to a third year student, he will give you a thesis on sustainability. He will, if you ask him to make a report, you will find that sustainability runs in his blood. But if you ask him to design a single bedroom, he cannot make two lines with a pencil. This is what our education system is doing. So, something which was inherently part of our blood and veins is first being taken away, and then we try to retrofit it. This is how we've been doing it over the years. So, which is why I say that if we simply look at history with the right attitude, we will find sustainability as as a lifeblood of the way we build and way we lived. There would be no need to actually teach sustainability as a subject. But this is again the
Exactly.
problem of multidisciplinary society. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think I want to rant further on the capability of architecture students to be able to pick up a pencil and draw a building and speak tons on and volumes on sustainability. But that's an important point which we all must think about.
Ram, I may just like to add a line on, we need to relook at the way we have just picked up the carnivalesque nature of placemaking, and we have, bloated it. We have really made it too way big, and we, in the process, we lost the inherent nature of the place itself. So, I mean, there is a good literature on carnivalesque nature of architecture or public space, and I think that has become too loud for us. And all these shiny and big spaces, big lights, big talks have become very, very prominent in the new placemaking system. Over to you, Ram.
Thank you, Mansi. Thank you, Sunit, for those points. And uh, I'd just like to invite Habib to share his point of view on this.
Well, much has been said. I mean, I won't agree. I cannot agree more than what these two guys have said. Uh, Basically, we are talking of placemaking as an output or a product of a system of architects and designers who have bloated egos, and we have made placemaking into a ornament, something which is like Suneet and Mansi have just said, uh, into an iconic system which does not belong to anywhere, and ironically, we call it placemaking. See, talking of lakes and rivers, and I'll give two examples. Lakes and rivers were, I mean, if you talk of concept of a common good, what is a common good and what is a private good? See, the lakes and the rivers, let's say, were common goods. Common goods means it was to be used by anyone freely, anytime. You could go wash your clothes there, you could drink water, you can bathe, you can use it for agriculture, whatever you would want to do, you could do, and that was the concept of a common good. On rivers, we started building dams, and the concept of a common good went away. The Britishers started, charging money or tax to use the water of a lake in a city or a village or a town, and the concept of a common good went away. And then we started channelizing, the rivers and the lakes, let's say, into an organized system of water supply. And so water no longer is a common good these days. Water has become a private good. Water, private good of the government or private good of a certain section of people. So the erosion of the common good has eroded the traditional concept making concepts and principles. So, I mean, similarly, I think Suneet is junior to me, but during our time, there was a very popular thesis topic called civic centers, civic plazas. In Delhi also you will find Bhikaji Kama Place and Nehru Place, all these things are very hot topics of thesis. Every other student used to take a thesis and work on civic center. But that concept is also was a common good. I mean, you had offices to sustain, you had commercial activities happening there, you had shops in order to sustain the civic plaza that was being developed in a city, which was accessible as a common good. But these days, we have eroded the concept of that common good, and we have made it into a private good. Like some talked of, I think Mansi and Sumit, both of you talked about of shopping malls, which is a very is not an inclusive activity at all. It is accessible by only few, and it has come into a private good sector. So the erosion of the common good and converting it into a private good for whatever economic and commercial reasons have actually killed the concept of placemaking. I have extensively studied and traveled in the UK, studying this and thinking about this aspect. The concept of placemaking is so subtle and is so nature oriented that you don't imagine or you will never comprehend that a placemaking effort has been taken by a designer. I mean, Sunil will agree. I mean, the kind of uh, gardens and the large scale developments that have happened, and lakes are a very important part of those gardens in the UK. I mean, they're phenomenal to see. We went. I am not able to place the exact name of the garden, but I can tell you that I mean we thought that it was never ever designed by a professional, and it was so naturally done and so humbly done. There was no ego of any human intervention in the design and the output that was there. And then when we went to the museum, making of the garden, and then we saw that there were landscape architects, there were designers, there were urban designers, sociologists, botanists, who have worked on the entire team of 36 people who have worked on that, garden. And that I think was a very fine example of, keeping aside our egos, the bloated egos of the so-called trained architect and designers, and working on a product which makes a very important placemaking in that urban and the fabric that existed around that. And what are we doing in our country? What is our urban fabric? What is our urban placemaking? Tell me a city like Ahmedabad, for example. If you leave aside the historic city, the poles and the old city part, what is placemaking anywhere? I mean, in the city, not why Ahmedabad, any
Nothing.
city. Delhi, for example, Delhi still is rich, in certain areas where the concept of common good still exists. But so, if we are able to do placemaking in a very subtle, non-human intervention and not forced and not iconic and not egoistic, then the concept of placemaking works. Otherwise, it kills the urban fabric and the quality of life. So that's my take on that.
Thank you, Habib. And I
Beautiful
think,
learning from common good and exclusivity. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Common good and pardon, there was a voice break, Sunit. What you said something?
I'm saying wonderful learning from the idea of common good versus exclusivity.
Because
No,
exclusiveness is always excluding, no?
I
Sorry,
only put
please
it,
go on.
Sunit. What you said, I only just put it in a concept of common goods.
yeah. I think a very interesting point. And here, two things uh, comes to my mind when we talk about placemaking. One is uh, the issue that we see with Indian cities. First is, are we doing placemaking? First of all, in public realm, and secondly, are we doing right? I think uh, Mansi, Suneet, you have very well captured the point that are we doing right? Are we designing it with nature? Are we respecting the nature on which these sites have been built? And are we integrating it so that it follows the topography and it respects the nature? And the example, Habib, that you gave about this park where it has been designed in such a way that you don't even know it is designed. So that's the respect of nature, that you actually don't even know that it has been integrated so well. So that's one aspect. And I think the second aspect is, where does placemaking sits in our context? So when we talk about cities, uh, are our cities actually focusing on placemaking? That is again one of the big
We are
concerns.
focusing. I love Nagpur. My love, my Ahmedabad. That's what it is, and then selfie point. That's
So,
what placemaking has been
so
reduced
Yes,
to.
that is the limited placemaking we are talking about.
Instagrammable moment.
Yes, yes.
And also
Reliable.
time bound, huh? Time
Making
bound.
reels and
I think over a period of time, city branding and placemaking, people have confused these terms. And what started in New York as a city branding exercise, people have made that a common definition of placemaking. But I think placemaking is much more deep rooted and much more fundamental in nature, which doesn't and if we look at Indian context, for example, so we have planners, we have architects, but if you look at a municipal corporation or a development authority, most of the time the architects and planners are busy in doing building permissions or planning permissions. They are hardly
oh, they're
taking up.
busy in something else. Ram. They're busy in something else, which we don't want to say it publicly. They're busy in
Let's,
something else.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
let's
Let's skip
not go
that
there.
part.
Let's not
Yeah,
go there. I
let's
think.
skip that part. And but these projects are not these public realm projects are not coming up. So whatever limited placemaking that we see, either it happens on private properties or it happens on a campus basis, a ring fenced area. But public realm in general is not getting the attention which it deserves. uh, and one of the fundamental issues which I also see here is that when we talk about level of plans, we hardly go at granular plans. We don't talk about plans which are implementable. We are talking about plans which are at city level or at zonal level, where we are talking about essential infrastructure or form of the city. But we are not actually coming to a placemaking level. Most of the corporations that we have, they don't have urban designers in their teams.
You already nailed it, Ram.
So,
You
so
nailed it.
so these are some of the capacity related issues, and I think that's where I want to touch upon our second uh, aspect, which is related to community. So how do we actually build community led development? We know that we have capacity issues, we know that they are misplaced priorities, we know that uh, having that placemaking, community involvement is very important, and respect to community needs is very important. So very briefly, I'll not want to elongate it lot because we have had a long discussion, but very briefly I would like you to reflect your thoughts in terms of how we can leverage communities, involve communities in design, so that our entire discussion and debate about making community level spaces and building communities with design. So how we can advocate that and promote that in our cities. So with that, I'd just like to invite you to briefly share your ideas on building communities. Suneet, over to you.
I missed the question because I had gone out of this. The internet had failed me. So if you could just repeat the question.
Yes, Sunil. So the question, the topic of discussion is that one aspect is placemaking. Now, the second aspect is how do we kind of bring communities to the center in placemaking? How do we empower communities? What is it that we can do to make sure that our communities are involved in placemaking exercise and their values and needs are prioritized?
Ram, I am unfortunately not an expert on this, and I don't think I have much to contribute to say how community involvement can be done. I only know the fact that if and where community development is done, there is community pride that is built, and therefore the place becomes a little more relevant and respected and maintained. But I really can't offer much on how to go about community involvement. So maybe
Sure,
Mansi
sure.
can shed some light.
Mansi, any thoughts you have?
Yeah, I want to give two examples here very quickly. One example, one of my students is right now fighting for a lake to be conserved as a lake. Local authorities have come there and chopped off 1,000 trees to make an Ayurvedic garden. Now, local people of that area where they live around the lake, if they are saying that they would like to preserve the lake or conserve the lake in its status quo, local authority and the designers, urban designers who are involved in that project, have to simply listen to the local people. This is the first step. I'm just giving very, very raw example, which is very fresh in my head, So I think as designers and local authorities and local politicians, if you really want to build community, in urban situation, it is extremely difficult because we are a heterogeneous community. We come from different states, speaking different languages, different religion, different belief systems. So anyway, we are not unified whole as it used to be in the village. And as rightly mentioned by Habib Khan sir in the beginning when he was giving example of music, the Indian music versus the other music. So, given this heterogeneous situation, if you have these few sparks of occasion, when I'm giving this example of lake, you better just listen to your community, which is saying that they would like to keep the lake like that. So why not design it accordingly? Why do you want to go and chop off thousands? And it happened last year in Ajmer, where they cut off the entire forest to make a fruit orchard, and the whole city kept protesting and nobody listened to it. So I think the first step to community participation or community planning, which is taught by the way, and in architecture we don't teach community by the way, so we have to be also knowing that, because architecture is a very monolithic monoculture way of education. So at least in planning and in urban design also we don't teach community making. So in your discussion, you are trying to bring a conversation like community building and placemaking are two sides, or they have to go hand in hand. But I don't think that is the way the profession looks at it. But at least in planning education, there is a community participation process. Even our constitution says that to plan. So the least we can start is listen to the people. And that will be my tagline for your question, to keep it brief.
Thank you. Thank you, Mansi. Habib,
Talking,
any thoughts on
uh,
your side?
Mansi would be glad to know this, that I mean, the very empowered and very active activist groups in Nagpur who have been
Yes.
able to, circumvent the government and, make the government cancel few projects which were
And
destroying a
also
lot
the
of.
Futala Lake, your
Yeah,
Futala
yeah, yeah.
Lake.
I'm talking of that and the Ajni and the Bharat Nagar and all. So they were pretty active, the community participation. But I have a little different take on this. You compare that I am going to have a bypass surgery and you're asking the community to help and,
No.
empower
Yes.
the doctors to do that. I think some things, or a trust, a public trust, accounts have to be filed, returns have to be filed, and you're asking the community to do and, participate in that. Some things have to be left to the experts and to the designers. I think it is the sensitivity. We need to develop the sensitivity and the expertise in a trained professional to understand the nuances of culture, the nuances of existence of a society, the traditional aspects, the contextual aspects, and other aspects that go into designing. And we should leave it to experts. We should not involve community in that. Activism is something different. What we're talking of, development of placemaking, development of community involvement, I think it should be left to experts. I mean, for a change, I agree with the current system of governance, where it is based on a fundamental fact that we are here to preserve democracy and not practice it. So we should, we should, we should also say that we are here to uh, preserve democracy and not practicing as far as placemaking and community involvement in architecture and urban design is concerned. So we should leave it at that.
Thank you, Habib. And I think with that note, I would move towards the wrapping up of this session. And I think it has been a wonderful discussion. And thank you, Suneet. Thank you, Mansi. Thank you, Habib, for sharing your thoughts and
It's been two
ideas.
hours, Ram. It's been 2 hours, and I was wondering, will I be able to speak in 2 minutes on this topic, which I am
Yes,
not an expert
same here.
No, it has been very interesting discussion, and I think we touched upon a lot of interesting aspects, and there has been good suggestions which have come on the table. Whether we talk about respecting the nature, uh, looking at placemaking holistically, looking at the needs of communities. I think there are a lot of good messages which have come out of this discussion, which would be really helpful for students and for practitioners when they start evaluating that they are looking at community building projects and looking at designing and planning cities. They should be looking at these as some of the basic fundamental principles. So I would like to I have a deep gratitude from my side to all of you, Suneet, Mansi, and Habib, for sharing this wisdom and knowledge with us. And with that, I'd like to close this session. Thank you so
And
much.
for you to be
Thank
able to
you.
structure all this for us, I think that is
Yes,
also a big thing about gratitude, if you ask me.
Yes,
yeah.
thanks a lot.
And I will say tolerating me also for that matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to
And it's
you,
really
Kavita.
pleasure and privilege to sit with Sunit sir and Habib sir. Over
Thank
to you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
It was very thought provoking session and very wonderfully moderated by you, sir, Ram sir. And I think this was the most powerful and I think heavy panel that we had in both of the days of IIDA Summit. And really glad that all of you had your own own perspectives. And I think in a way we sort of were successful in the thought that we had to have different perspectives and even agreements and disagreements and basically solution oriented discussions. So thank you. So sorry. Thank you so much again for dedicating your time on a day like Sunday, and even with all your busy schedules. Really appreciated your insights, and we would love to have you on board again in one of our upcoming sessions and our initiatives. So thanks a lot, and
Thank you.
grateful to all of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Take
Thank you.
care. Bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.